All right, y'all. So we are just impromptu going to record this VI table. And the premise of the whole conversation is delegating, but also letting accountability live where it should live. And maybe even some coaching, dare I say, or supporting people to step into more accountability within their role. So Taylor and I are just honestly having a same page meeting, and I realized this is a podcast conversation. So this is very different in that there are no prompts. This is just us processing and talking.
Essentially, we're talking about the difference between what happened when you passed over integrator specific accountability or ownership to me.
So how did we each get to the point that we actively wanted to be rid of things and actively wanted
Mm.
people to stop coming to us? I think that's the crux of the question for me is we are in mid conversation about some people on our team. They might be coming to us with questions that we don't think we need to be involved in answering. It's something where, no, this is your role. Like you can just actively own this and do it. I know for myself, and I think probably the same for you, Taylor, maybe a little bit less actually, but I think to some extent, I didn't used to feel that way. I used to want everything to come through me. How did that change? If we want people to be doing the same thing, then like to take full ownership of something, not only in terms of like actively owning it and being accountable for it, but also in terms of feeling confident to make a decision. How did that happen?
So much of our working relationship has been about transition. Just from the get go, that's kind of been baked into how we work together, how we function. Because really, you think about it, I took on office manager stuff, then I took on billing stuff, and then I took on director of operations stuff.
Yeah. I think it was a couple weeks in where I was like, you were a gym. And so I knew that I wanted somebody like you to be doing this stuff. I feel like early on in our
Yeah.
conversations where I was saying something to you and also just gauging your interest. Like, I don't know what this looks like, but in the future, dot, dot, I
Mhm.
don't know when. Well, who knows?
But honestly, it was like this time of year 5 years ago, I was
Yeah.
sitting on my partner's sister's farm because that's where we were living at the
Mhm.
time. And you were basically like, I think you're going to be my COO someday. And I remember
Oh,
feeling
that's
like,
so funny.
so giddy. Yes, I want that. I love that. I'm excited to do that. So I think ultimately, I'm very comfortable with being in transition and kind of being in process for the most part. I sometimes will struggle with the emotions that can come up with
Mhm.
change, particularly when it's people related. And I feel for people, but I'm comfortable with let's figure this out or let's do this gradually. And that was very much baked into the nature of our interactions and how my time at the counseling hub started. So it wasn't like I was in a position for a long time and then suddenly something different came along.
Yeah.
But I think also you were very intentional, like you're saying, you knew from the beginning, basically, that this is the direction you wanted to head in.
Mhm.
So we were just very open in talking about one, this is where I see this going.
Mhm.
But also, sometimes I wonder how much of the magic that I feel like we experience is related to us, who we are,
Mhm.
rather than how we do things. Because I think you are very comfortable in being direct with me, and I am very comfortable in receiving your directness
Mhm.
without there being a lot of emotion attached to it. And so when talking about, I want to do this thing, I want to go in this direction, I didn't need a lot of specifics in terms of timeline, or if I
Mhm.
felt unclear about expectations around something, let's say, or how to do something, I will tell you. And I have told you, like, I'm game to take this thing on, but I'm feeling anxious about it because I don't understand this piece of it. Or I want to walk through step by step what might this thing look like. I also think part of this for me is comparing and contrasting like what happened in the transition, you giving me things to our DCO being in the DCO role.
Mhm.
That transition was very different in that it wasn't necessarily you giving up things to her because the DCO position at that time was a new position. We had transitioned from you passing that over to the CD and then the CD left. And so then you kind of took it back on, but we also
Mhm.
had CTLs that were doing some of it. And then we brought the DCO on about 7, 8 months later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I wonder if some of that was just a much more clear and direct transition of power or accountability, so to speak,
Mhm.
from like I'm handing over billing to you. It's going from Tara to Taylor or whatever. Whereas with the DCO role, it was like, well, we passed it over to the CD, but then some of it got passed back and some of it has changed. Like, I just wonder if some of that was a little bit more just murky.
Wow, that is so funny. I thought you meant the exact opposite.
Really?
I thought you meant the opposite because the CD and the DCO role, at least in my body, like when we get into the really nitty gritty, I think there's nuance between what's DCO, what's CTL, what's a supervisor, all that. But I think there's overlap between the roles that we have on our clinical side. In terms of the core responsibilities from the get go, it has felt,
That feels more
this,
clear.
this, and this. And yours, it has felt like emergence constantly, just sort of constantly questioning. I think that's also just reflective of me that the operations side of things, it's not that I don't see what is happening, like I can't see the things, but to categorize them and then like pass them over, that really starts to feel like, confusing, super confusing, basically. And so then I think for me that your role has felt more like emergence, even though I knew I wanted you to be COO sort of from the onset or pretty early on. That has felt
Yeah.
like emergence.
It felt so much more clear because for me, so much of operations is so black and white.
Yeah.
But the clinical side of things feels like it can be a little bit more flexible or like up to interpretation, maybe.
I think when you're doing operations, a lot of the time it is black and white, but it's less about the specifics and it's more about, I think, the ownership piece that feels like accountability and ownership, where if your HR becomes a core responsibility of the director of ops or of the integrator, which for us it is, HR is a core responsibility. And then visionary sits here and then integrator sits here, like all this stuff. But to transition a person and now the whole team knows if you're core HR, okay, so that means what? That means you're responsible for like hiring and firing. Are you doing benefits administration and oversight? Are you doing processes and policy? It's like, what does this specifically look like? Like, what are the things that are held by HR? And also, I think what's my comfort level in saying, like, oh, integrator now owns full disciplinary oversight and I'm out, you know? I think probably because it's not like the details of the processes necessarily, but it's, I think, the ownership and accountability for the integrator or like a director of ops role. That is probably what felt overwhelming, I think is probably the word. If I'm like being honest, it felt overwhelming.
This is just a theory I'm tossing out there. I wonder if the ambiguity for you about maybe the operational side of things and like what lives where and when do I pass this thing over, what's appropriate for this person to have. I honestly wonder if that made it easier ultimately
Oh, that's interesting.
versus the clinical services side of things. I don't know if you feel this way, but I see that side of things as being very precious to you. I mean, precious as in like important, like cherished. I think it's like a
Mhm.
child. I want it to be done well.
Yes.
And I have specific ideas about what that means and what that
Yeah.
might look
No,
like
that's
in
fair.
practice. Whereas the operational side of things, it feels overwhelming because it's ambiguous, but ultimately it feels almost like there's less attachment to the specifics if the intentionality is there and the outcome is ultimately like things are clearer for the team or this thing is done exactly the same way every time.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. There is absolutely nuance on the operation side of things. I'm thinking of like our client care coordinator, our billing manager, like our operations assistant. These people in these roles, I don't know if it's because they've been with us for so long, but there's a high level of trust that if there needs to be nuance, they're able to effectively navigate that and they do it overall well. And if they don't, they also know to go to you, or they feel comfortable going to you, and they will. I think also they don't have anybody reporting to them. So there's something about like they're responsible for clients, but they're not responsible for ensuring clinical quality. They're not
Yeah.
responsible for helping
Yeah.
clinicians identify development. They're not responsible for, they're not
The
doing
stakes are very
anything.
different.
Yeah. So the practice feels like a well oiled machine. Like the whole thing feels really, I don't want to say streamlined, but like sleek and clear and like not a lot of rough spots. We like clean it. We tend to it well. But the ops side, especially, I don't even think about it ever. I mean, I care for the people. I think about them. There's no fear, there's no doubt, there's no worry, there's nothing on that side. If there is, it's very, very small and it might pop up if something happens that's a little bit outside the realm of norm. There's so many clinicians, like there's so many different personalities, there's so many different people, there's so many different needs. And yeah, maybe precious is the word, but not in that I cherish it more, just in that this has a higher likelihood of breaking just because of the sheer number.
Almost harder to repair should something break. Operationally, if something's broken, this is a silly example, but we have a really old AC unit and we were like, oh, we're probably going to have to get that replaced when we bought the house. And our realtor
Yeah.
was like, actually, you want to keep that for as long as you can because the old ones are so easy to fix when they break. Operations are kind of like things break, it's easier to fix. But with the clinical services side of things, when things break, I think it's a little less clear about what might be broken and what
Yeah.
might it take to fix the break. Is it
Hmm.
a person issue? Is it a process
Hmm.
issue? This is not a slight at our DCO. I know she's the right person for our organization, and I think she's done a great job in a lot of ways in the role. I wonder too if there's something about she's younger in terms of experience, and it's a big role. She's very solid in her counselor identity, but it can be a big leap, I think, to go from being an informal leader and strong in your counselor identity to then leading other counselors, including
Hmm.
people who are developing their counselor identity, and also to be in charge of not only ensuring compliance with processes, but also involved in the development of processes and making decisions about, well, this is what I think should happen with this kind of service, or this is how we should implement this kind of service.
Yeah.
I don't think those are impossible tasks, nor are they impossible tasks for her, but it's a lot of new learning and kind of on the job experience as compared to my training was in policy planning and
Yeah.
administration. So I came in with lived experience of leadership and organization and management, and also my formalized training was heavy in that area. And also, I think just kind of a natural inclination to that kind of thinking. I think it is kind of a little bit of what I said earlier, like the magic is about who we are. Like it's a little bit about
Mhm.
who I am, but also my training.
Yeah.
And the role kind of grew with me.
Yes. Yeah. You weren't
I grew,
stepping into something major. It was like
yeah, yeah,
it's been in development. It continues to be in development.
yeah. And I also
Yeah.
think there's a little bit more freedom or
Yeah.
flexibility in building the steps as you're walking up the stairs versus giving someone a fully fleshed
Giant role.
and
Hmm.
saying, do this. You know what I mean? There's a little less room for error or a little
Hmm.
less flexibility in that approach.
I guess maybe the question is, can you train somebody? The answer is for sure yes. But I think I'm wondering, like, okay, what's the felt sense of doing this? How do you train somebody to take full ownership of a role?
Yeah.
And then again, I feel like with us, because it was ambiguous, to use your language, like your role and sort of
Mhm.
what this looks like over time, things were just allowed to sort of develop. That works best for me. And so having that freedom and flexibility to allow the role to almost design itself based on what's needed at the point in time that it's needed.
Yeah.
That's not what it is for the DCO role. I don't feel rigid about it, but it just feels so clear to me. It feels so
Mhm.
obvious that it's
Mhm.
this. Clearly, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the responsibilities. However, I know what we're coming up against. Is it too big? Do you tease out a second role? Like to have somebody be responsible for quality, compliance, all clinical services, including supervision, NBCC stuff, or like the programming services, like workshops, groups, any sort of new services. If we're doing developmental tracks, is it too much? My answer is still, I don't know.
Yeah. What do other people do? So I'm thinking like, what do other practices our size? What's their org chart? What's their accountability
Hmm.
chart look like? How do they approach these kinds of things? I don't know. I haven't actually
Hmm.
looked into it, but I just was thinking like, what if there was a clinical director and that person was accountable for all clinical services, including adding a new service? And that would look like outlining what it would take not only to implement it, but also overseeing the implementation and like any training and all the blah, 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 blah. Like
Hmm.
that would be the clinical director. They would also be directing.
Pause. As soon as you said that, immediately I was like, there is something there because I sort of feel like, ooh, what service though? I think there is
Yeah,
something about, I feel like I'm a clinical snob, maybe a little bit. Like I have really high
you do.
opinions and
Yeah, I
thoughts
don't
and
know if I'd call you a
expectations.
snob, but because it feels very clear to you, I don't
Mhm.
know if you make the assumption that it's also equally clear to other people. Like, I don't know if
Mm,
that is what happens.
I don't think I think about it, but probably I think it's obvious. So I assume that it's obvious for everybody, you know?
And I don't think it is. I also think that automatically makes ownership
Yes.
kind of
Hard.
murky.
Yeah.
Yeah, challenging.
Because I
So,
do have opinions, strong opinions about
yeah,
clinical
so
services, especially.
yeah,
Mhm.
so how can our DCO or a CD really have full ownership? Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think that is
Mhm.
at play. To what
Mhm.
extent, I don't know. But let's say theoretically in another world or in an ideal world, you had that clinical director. It almost makes me wonder. It feels similar to me as like there was a point where you had to stop seeing clients and you had to stop working
Mhm.
with students. It was taking you away from the bigger picture things.
Mhm.
It's similar with the CD or the DCO or whatever this role is, whoever owns the clinical services. There gets to be a point, if I'm talking social work, micro, meso,
Yeah, yeah.
macro, the micro has to stop in order to be able to focus on the macro. And so if I'm taking our current DCO, if I'm using that as a template, I think operating on micro, meso, macro all at the same time, that's intense. That's a lot of
Yeah.
shifting in between. I think in an ideal world, I would design a position where, let's say, the CD would not need to be having the kind of direct oversight that our DCO currently has of clinicians. Like that, I think would need to pass. It almost makes you think of like clinical team leads. I know the way we have it set up now is that
Yeah.
there is not accountability there, but it almost seems like there would
Complication.
need to be either the CTLs transition into a more accountability focused role where they would
Mhm.
actually be accountable for their teammates' numbers or potentially some disciplinary stuff. Again, this is not us. This is some practice somewhere else
Yeah,
out there,
theoretically.
theoretically, and that the CD would be directing the assistant CD, the clinical provider supervisors, whatever you want to call that role. There almost
Mhm.
would need to be a middleman
Some
in
point, yeah.
between the CD and the issues that are happening on a micro level with the clinicians so that the CD
Yeah.
would be able to have this bigger picture almost happening of like, okay, we're going to add this service and it's going to look like this. And just what we're wanting, the projects that move the business forward. Like, I'm just thinking about like, sure, maybe you would decide the vision. Like, I want to add,
The service or this thing or do this
I
thing.
really want a nurse practitioner to do med management. That's the vision. So then the clinical director would be doing the work of, okay, how would I integrate that service into our existing clinical services?
Given your language, how would I integrate that service? My thought was like, actually, I wonder what percentage of that would live with the integrator. To what extent would the integrator build this out
Yeah.
initially and say it's going to live here and like this, and then pass on some of the more specifics to the DC or the CD or the DCO?
Yeah. Yeah.
My other thought in all of this, though, I don't like a lot of cooks in the kitchen. It's almost like there's no right answer in any of this. It's literally just what is your philosophy? What are your foundational beliefs? And I don't mean from an EOS perspective. I mean, I know I don't want a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I don't like that. It's messy. Everyone ends up doing slightly different versions of something. Nope. That's like the minimum effective dose. What's the smallest number of people we need to do the most effective job? So for me, the idea of having a bunch of CTLs as like mini owners of disciplinary processes and a team and being accountable for numbers philosophically, like for Tara, that's a fuck no. I don't think that it's wrong to do that though. Like for another practice owner, somebody who is more interested in having disbursement of disciplinary stuff and assuming they have a really clear process and they're more in like, you know what? It's fine if there's nuance. Like as long as everyone's following these key steps, it's okay. I just feel like there's a much higher likelihood of a mess happening because of that.
My pushback to that though, Tara, is if we're talking about scalability,
Yes, that's my
you know
other
what I
thought.
mean?
Like, okay, you need more people at some point. And if I'm thinking about the role, let's just say DCO role, and let's assume it's a practice that's roughly the size that we are, but we're removing the people from the role. So we have DCO role here. Let's say that we're saying these are the core responsibilities for this role. Then my thought is, okay, if we were to tease this apart, would we want more people underneath, let's say 4 people underneath reporting and check CTLs, let's say clinical team leads reporting on accountability or being accountable to their team of clinicians? Where would discipline live in all of that? Or would we want to tease out the brain modes required for the various things that we want of a DCO? Would we instead want something like programs, services, workshops, groups, like things that are our professional development, like our PD stuff, the developmental tracks? Would that be one role in and of itself? And then the other is purely clinical in focus. Like it's just individual clinician development. It's just clinical quality, compliance, oversight, support, et cetera. Oversight soup of soup, like doing supervision of supervisors. I feel like this is the discussion we've been having also.
Yeah. And I think you touch on a good point, which is that EOS only can inform us so much, and that there's also individual philosophy. This is your specific business. This is our specific practice. How do we want to do this in a way that makes sense to us? Sometimes that's going to align really naturally. And sometimes EOS isn't the end all be all. There's always going to be nuance because I mean, you're taking something, a framework that is applicable to a popcorn company and a mental health practice. Like
Real
there's
estate, mental health. Yeah.
yeah, it's not going to give you everything you need. And I think sometimes too, we butt up against not like we think EOS does it wrong, but it's
Yeah.
like the unique framework or makeup of how we do things just doesn't.
It's not a one for one
No, it's
translation.
like
Yeah. It's like,
a square peg in a round hole
yeah.
sometimes, you know?
Yeah. I love EOS though. I still love it. Yeah. It's incredible.
Yeah, it drives how we
That is
think
how,
about and how we have these
yeah.
conversations.
It's what I was thinking is not the most nuanced because we get to fill in all that space. And it's such a key part of how we think, almost like it gives us the ability to even have these conversations clearly. It's like laying out things in such a clear way that now we get to, I don't know, play around with the nuance, play around with, okay, what works and what doesn't. Let me go back to, there's one more thing that I'm thinking about. I don't even know how to say the question. I don't even know exactly what it is that I'm asking, but there is something still about ownership and accountability. Maybe the question is, how do you effectively teach that? I don't feel like I do it well. Like, I don't feel like I taught you ownership or taught you accountability. Not that it's my soul, you're human. Of course, you've had experiences like this in life, period. But I think it just makes me wonder, how do you have somebody do this, especially if it might be at like the extent of your limits? Like, I'm thinking about some of the conversations we've had in the recent past, even about like marketing oversight. It is also kind of cloudy. The translation from in my head to out of my mouth, I feel like that's cloudy. And maybe it seems more clear in my head, but it's hard to like say. And I think sometimes that doesn't work for you. You don't like abstract as much.
It's harder for me to grasp onto.
Yeah. And so my question is still the same. Is it coachable? Is it trainable? It must be to some extent. To what extent? How do you assess it
Yeah.
also? Like assess coachability?
I honestly think that's a different question. How do you assess coachability and then how do you coach or how do you
Yeah, they are different questions.
so I think that's interesting. Like, how do you assess coachability? That I don't know. I mean, honestly, I think that's
Yeah.
kind of at the root of what you've been trying to play around with some of the
Yeah.
hiring stuff, like the permeability. That to
Mhm.
me translates to coachability in some regards. It's not a one-to-one to use your language,
Mhm.
but in terms of how do you assess for it, I don't know. But I think I can tell you the qualities, what makes someone coachable. I think there has to be a higher level of flexibility of thought.
Hearing you say there has to be a higher level of flexibility of thought, it makes me wonder if you are thinking about coachability from a higher level role, like a leadership role. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah, I do. If we're talking about non-leadership roles, there's obviously the capital L leadership, but I also think informal leadership.
Yes.
If we're not talking about those kinds of roles, we're talking about your entry and mid-level positions. I don't necessarily think there has to be a high level of flexibility of thought. I think there has to be some component of flexibility because I think the way we talk about operating business or structuring business and is that things are gonna change. Like, when we talk in your masterminds about setting things up, we talk about them in a sense of, like, the living practice. It is going to be changing. So I do
Mhm.
think that at entry, there has to be at least some level of flexibility or ability to pivot or, like, ride the wave. But I think particularly with a leadership role or a leadership position, there is a high level of flexibility required because I think the pivots required are bigger. You think about what the changes, the tweaks we might be making on scale. I'm in a very like watery
Today,
headspace. I'm thinking
springtime.
like
We want pools.
waves, like
Yeah.
those closest to the thing that makes the ripple
Yeah.
have the biggest felt sense. And those further out, it's just going to be like a gentle little, whereas
Yeah.
leaders might be riding this bigger
Yeah.
wave.
Yeah.
I think necessarily there has to be an ability and a comfort with, all right, here comes this big wave. I'm going with it, you know?
Mhm.
I think some of that is just like by nature of when you have a structure the way EOS does and the way we do, where you have your leaders kind of more insular and your folks more out. I don't know if that's by design, but I certainly think it's a function of that kind of a
Yeah.
structure. But I also think it is by design for us specifically. Like
Yes,
the
it is.
intentionality behind things is that
Mhm.
when we make changes, it should be minimally or not at all felt by the
Yes.
rest of the team.
Yeah, where it's like a nice gentle wave. Yeah.
So gentle that some people might not even feel it. It
Yeah.
might not even be perceived unless we tell them
Mhm.
specifically about it.
Yeah, you're right.
But so to your earlier question about like how do you assess for coachability? I don't know how you assess for it necessarily, but I can tell you like the traits or the qualities are someone who can be flexible or
Yeah.
who is comfortable to some extent knowing that there will be change and that the expectation
Yeah.
is one of flexibility. Like, here's
Mm.
the thing that we're giving you to do right now, but it's not written in stone. You gotta be okay with that. You gotta
Mhm.
be okay to also to be able to sit it down and like poke at it and pull it apart
Yeah.
together. That
Yeah.
can be a very vulnerable experience to say,
Yeah.
like, this is your role. We're all gonna sit and talk about it and pull it apart. Not you, but the role
Yeah.
and like what
Yeah.
might be happening in the role.
Mhm.
So there's also a certain sense of self assuredness or like,
Yeah, almost a solid sense of I don't wanna say identity because I don't think
I think it
yeah.
is. Like if we sat down and we put the integrator role under a microscope, I can engage in that. I can
Yes.
engage in that conversation and that discussion because ultimately I have separation from
Yeah.
that thing. I am who I am. And our discussion about this thing isn't going to change. Now, I'm going to have feelings about it. Despite my best efforts, I am,
Yeah.
but I'm still going to be able to engage in that conversation.
Mhm.
There does have to be some sort of sense of identity, sense of place, sense of confidence in your ability
Yeah.
to do this thing and also your place in this structure, in this organization. If that's not solid or if that is in question, then it becomes really difficult to have the conversations that we have to be able to have about accountability chart and who is fully owning a thing and what does it mean to fully own a thing. I think sometimes what works between the two of us is me being able to say, like, no, Tara, that's me. You need to let go
Mhm.
of this thing. I just need to do it. You know, like, if you're okay with it, I'm just going to do this and I can let you know, but
Yeah.
you just need to let me do this thing. If you
Mhm.
don't have someone who is confident, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
and able to hold their own and own their ownership, that becomes really difficult.
So the caveat to this is it might be because I own the business and because I'm the visionary. Let me just put that out there. But the other piece is I like that part and it never feels personal. And maybe it's because primarily I'm the one that's like, I'm not sure about this. What do you think about that? Like maybe that initial poking or questioning.
I think that's you. I don't think that's necessarily because you own the business. I think
That's
that's
what I'm
because of who
wondering.
you are.
But it's the same for my own role where I'm like, I don't fucking know. Like, this isn't
Yes.
working. This isn't it.
Yeah.
This isn't right? I like doing that. And like my life, like I love the practice. I love the people. I love the role I'm in. And also, there's so much fucking more to life. This is a part of me. This
Yep.
isn't everything about me? So I think I don't care when it happens. And I forget that some people, maybe a lot of people, I don't
Yeah.
know, actually, like
Yeah. I
there is
do.
more of a, it's like tied together.
Yeah. The attachment is
Mhm.
stronger. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then it becomes hard to poke at this role because this role is, well, I'm doing this role. And like, are you saying I'm not doing a good job? Where it's like, no, that's not at all what
Yep.
this conversation is about. I mean, maybe like you're not
Yeah.
actually doing good at these things, but it's really more about the role.
Yeah.
And obviously,
Yeah.
this is a separate conversation from is it the right person for the seat? Because
Yeah.
that can be about, yeah, you're not actually doing a good job. Like, you're not doing
Yeah.
what we need done.
Even that conversation takes like a strength of identity to
Jeez,
be able to engage in.
it does.
Like, I love you and I value you.
Yes.
And there's not anything wrong with you.
Right.
However, your skill set is not in alignment with what this thing is. That's
Yeah.
hard. That's hard to say. That's hard to receive, but sometimes
Yeah.
that's a part of the conversation. That's like what capacity essentially gets at
Yeah.
when we're talking about gets it once it has capacity to do it.
Yeah, yeah. That and unique ability was popping in my mind too. Yeah, goodness. This shit is hard, man. It's hard because there's people. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's not. I do still feel full disclosure for anybody listening that the DCO role is one that we're actively grappling with. I think maybe you said that earlier and maybe
Mhm.
not. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating something you've already said, but it is something that we're trying to make sense of this role and the unique ability, I would say, of our current DCO and like what aspects, if we split this out, is the role too big? Is the integrator involvement to date, has it been too little? There's been too much visionary involvement, which doesn't work well.
Yeah.
Something slightly amiss?
And what we think likely is a combination of those things.
Yeah, a little bit of like a couple of things. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to figure out sometimes. It feels like honestly IDS a little bit like you're trying to isolate what's the root variable, what's the root
Mhm.
cause, what's the key variable, what's the most likely thing. And I still feel like the answer at this point is I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
not
also
sure.
compounded because you and I have
Yeah.
very different perspectives about
Yeah.
what that root thing might be, and we're
Yeah.
coming at it from totally different angles, and so that adds
Yeah.
another layer of complexity to it of,
Mhm.
it's that idea of there is no one reality
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah.
Like, everything is so colored by the experiences and personality and perception, and it's just another layer of trying to wade through and see as clearly as we can what's going on here, and thus how can we fix it? How can we make changes?
Yeah, and when you said some variation of, I'm not gonna get it verbatim, that we're approaching this from 2 really different like, our perceptions of what the root cause are is very different. What's super interesting about that, I feel like we both still think there's the same problem, like, the problem looks the same, but, like, our version of, like, why, or, like, the most probable why is different. I wonder if that's why it continues to feel kinda confusing because we're not on the same page, and I don't think either of us is wrong.
I don't think either of us is wrong, and I also don't think either of us feels strongly like,
Yes.
"No, it is this thing, and so
Yeah.
now I'm going to win you to my side or make my case," so to speak.
Yeah.
I think for both of us, it's like, "Well, I think it probably is
Yeah.
this thing, but it could also be this," and so then when
Yeah.
you're saying, you're from your perspective, I'm thinking, "Well, yeah, it could be that too."
It's fluid, like
Fluid.
water. Stick to the water.
Yep.
One more thought. So here is also maybe like a callback to the origin of this whole thing is sort of the concept of delegation and accountability. I think it's hard to answer if this question remains unanswered. Like if we
Yeah.
can't be clear on the role, it's hard to then fully delegate something because
Yeah.
it's like I have this role. I don't know if it's the right one. I've got the right person in the seat, the right person for the business. Are they the right person for the seat? But the seat isn't even fully defined yet. So then
Yeah.
I'm also going to further ask them to do something and take ownership of something in a seat that we're not even sure should be in existence in the way that currently is. Like we're
Yeah.
building off of something that I do not think it's faulty. Like I think that we're hitting our ceiling. Something needs to shift and
It's exposing the cracks. It's kind of like the thing of when you add more pressure onto something, that thing
yes,
was working fine,
love it.
but
Yeah.
you add more pressure onto it, it exposes like, oh, there are these cracks, these stress points that we didn't realize.
Hmm.
And so then now we're reassessing what support do we need in place
Hmm.
to be able to withstand this greater
Yep.
pressure? And how different is that support from what we originally had?
I
Is it
think that's
multiple supports?
yes, yeah. I think that's a game that I like to play with myself. I think I do it without thinking, but I used to think about it a lot. If I multiply this by 2, what would break first? Like, what's the next thing
Yeah.
that's gonna go? I remember hearing that question phrased, like, if you've multiplied your business by 2 or by 10 or by 20, what's gonna go first? It was like, holy shit. Well, this, or oh my God, this, it's like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
first thing that's gonna go we already know. We're already hiring for another role that needs to exist where it's like, oh, fuck, we need this thing. Like, this thing isn't
Yeah.
working. I'm thinking, even with the
Yeah.
capacity piece, what I really want, and this, again, for anybody listening who cares, it's marketing strategist. That's the seat that I want, that I think we need, not that I want, but that we need filled somebody to fully fucking own everything related to marketing. If we do that, then, so like this DCO thing, like the seat and sort of grappling with it is a little bit, I'm going to say a little bit on the back burner. It's still there and still relevant and still important, but almost marketing strategist needs to come first. When that happens, and let's say demand increases and then capacity
Yeah.
increases, or capacity then decreases, we're bringing on more clinicians, that's going to circle us right back to the DCO. And
Yeah.
so then it's going to be, well, okay, what does this role look like? What does it need to be next?
We're also giving ourselves some space to test, like we were talking
Yeah.
about. There's multiple variables that could be at play here. And so by just saying, like, well, this is still on the table, it's still in the zeitgeist of things we're considering, we can kind of test. Like you mentioned, you alluded to the integrator role. That's
Mhm.
an easy, like, okay, well, next quarter, let's see how things might feel differently if we adjust how the integrator is involved. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, how can I be more involved in the rock setting process and in helping filter the vision? And,
Yeah.
it gives us time to kind of test that hypothesis
Yeah.
and then see how that might also then translate down to that role and
Yeah.
where the cracks are showing or where things might be resolved
Yeah.
until capacity changes and then
Yeah. And then it
we're back
shifts
up.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why we need flexibility in
Yeah.
people engaged in these kind of roles.
Yeah. That's the living piece, the living practice piece. The feedback
Yeah.
is constant. Not even a feedback system, sure, but also just general feedback. Like we're taking in how we feel, like how things are running, where things are slowing down, where they're going too fast. All of it is, what are the bottlenecks? What are the inputs and outputs telling us? Like, yeah. All right. Anything else? Let's wrap this up. What else? What else do you
Let's wrap
think?
it up.
Anything else before we say goodbye?
Mm-mm.
All right. Yeah, I don't think there's anything either. This is one of those things. Sometimes I think to myself, why are people listening to me and then us just talk about things? I still don't really get it. I hope that it's helpful. Like I want it to be
Yeah.
helpful, like, if not anything, but to normalize the experience and process of being in a leader or the owner of a group practice. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, but I hope this is one of those things where it's like, it feels like a really important conversation. I don't doubt the importance of the conversation, and I'm not really sure if it's especially helpful. Hi, baby. Yeah. So I think that's really it on my end.
Yeah, I mean, I have to imagine. And so, like, if you're listening and this is not helpful, get feedback for us. Let us know.
No, this is really true. Yeah.
I have to imagine that it is like helpful for people to hear how we grapple with things and how things show up and
Oh, sure.
how we think about them, and that it's not just super cut and dried or crystal clear or straightforward, that there is a lot of processing to be done,
Yeah.
a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, we still don't know. We're still
Yeah.
actively in process. This is how we're thinking about it, but we don't ultimately
Yeah. There's no
know what the
clear answer
outcome of
yet.
this is going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. You know how it is. It's weird to live something and it be so normal and then for it to be helpful for others or for there to be the possibility that it's helpful for others is interesting. I remember being super early in practice ownership and saying to somebody, wanting to go and just see a practice run. Like I just wanted to be immersed in it. So yeah, if I think about it from that perspective, then yeah, I get it because I absolutely wanted that same thing. So anywho, all righty. Thanks for impromptu recording with me, T Dog.
Yeah.
Everybody listening. I think subscribe to the podcast to get more impromptu and also planned episodes and slash or share this with a friend who you think needs to hear it. So peace out. We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.